Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at The Reach. We're doing a series working our way through the Seven Kingdoms, looking at places. We'll do a few places over in Middle-earth at some point as well, but for now, let's carry on working our way through here. Last time we did the Iron Islands, we've done the Westlands and a few other areas before, so this time we'll look at The Reach. Now, by way of an introduction, obviously, I've got questions from my patrons. I'll try and pick up as much in the chat as we're going through. But by way of an introduction to the Reach as a whole, this is the most populous region in the Seven Kingdoms. Actually, let's put the little map up, shall we? Where should we put me? Let's put me down in the corner. So here we go. This is quartermaster.info. Always wish to give them credit. My favourite interactive map of Westeros. So what we're looking at in terms of the area is the sort of the middle and bottom left of this screen. You'll see there's an island just off the southwest coast there. That is the Arbor. And then that nice green fertile land heading up through the river valleys, keeping the mountains on the right. And then it stops just short of the mountains you can see there in sort of the top left of the screen. To the northeast of that, we have got the Riverlands. To the northwest, you've got the Westerlands, and then the other side of those mountains down in the southeast, that is where you get to Dawn. Now, when we're talking about the Reach, obviously the Reach is what this has been known as during the time of the Seven Kingdoms. But it was not always just one kingdom. For a large period of time, it was. We'll come on to that. But it was not always one kingdom. It started out as a huge amount of petty lords and petty kingdoms, eventually kind of bringing itself down to four broad areas, one of which is the Arbor, the island that ruled itself for quite some time. Another is the Marches, which is the area just basically bordering those mountains, so bordering onto Dawn. A third is Old Town and its environs, and then the fourth is the Kingdom of the Reach, which was the largest, and that spread out through the river valley. So the biggest river you may be able to just make out going through is the Mander, and basically all of the rivers which kind of flow into that, the tributaries of the Mander as well, they create this incredibly lush, fertile environment, which is the Reach. And that is what has made the Reach the most populous of the Seven Kingdoms that we have. Now, over time, these sort of four broad areas did slowly, one after another, they all bent to the knee to Highgarden and House Gardner. But all of these large houses that are there they claim and their ancestry back to Garth Greenhand. We did mention Garth Greenhand briefly, actually, last week, talking about the Iron Islands. Garth Greenhand is one of these legendary figures from the Age of Heroes, or possibly even earlier. There are so many legends about this character. George R. Martin always reminds us that these kind of characters from way back in the mists of time, we're not getting true stories of what they are. We're getting legends. We're getting folk tales. And there are huge amounts of folk tales about Garth Greenhand. He's representative of a huge amount of fertility deities, basically, that we get in sort of Western European culture as well, where a lot of this is kind of based. And he had many children, and those children are often claimed by these various different major houses in the Reach as being their forefather. They are descended from Garth Greenhand, and that gives them, in their eyes, sort of a justification for their role and their primacy. But in terms of the area, you'll see that this isn't. It has some mines and things like that, but this is mostly agricultural land, rich, lush, fertile. It's the second richest of the seven kingdoms, the richest being the Westerlands on account of all the gold mines and the like. But they can put out the largest army. They've got a huge navy just off the Red Wine fleet, based in the Arbor. That is one of the three largest fleets when we come to the time of A Song of Ice and Fire. House Hightower have a very strong fleet as well. And a lot of the houses, particularly in the marches, have very strong kind of martial reputations. So this is, of all, we don't often think of it like this, but of all of the parts of the Seven Kingdom, this is probably the one which has the greatest military weight. You wouldn't wish to put yourself against the Reach. They also, as well as that, they have this nightly tradition. So it's not just them calling up a whole bunch of lads from the farms with their hoes and their sort of pointy sticks. That they have this great nightly tradition, and this comes from their Andal heritage. Again, I'll touch on that in just one second, where being a knight, being valorous, showing great etiquette, this is the height of culture. And if you're thinking of like this idealized Arthurian legends or the French cavalry, the knights in their shining armor, that's the kind of feel that we've got going on here. And when you read about places like Highgarden and its environs, then it sounds almost idyllic. You get fields of golden roses, roses of many different colours, pleasure boats slowly floating down the river, islands where you can stop off and have a picnic while you're serenaded by bards. This is the height of knightly virtues is here, and chivalry is here. Now, where that has come from is the fact that the Reach has, over time, when the Andal invasion happened, the Reach had time to see what was going on. Whereas we were talking a long time ago, we were talking about the Vale of Arryn. That's where the Andals first arrived, and they had to react straight away. The invaders are coming. How do they cope? Do they fight? Do they try and make an alliance with them against one of their other rivals? What are they going to do? The Andal invasion, it wasn't just one big invasion fleet. This took place over hundreds, if not even thousands of years, this kind of drip, drip, drip of aggressive immigration, which meant that down in the Reach, they had plenty of time to figure out how they're going to react to this. Their fleet was strong enough that the Andals couldn't come around the south of Westeros and start landing on the west coast. So they were waiting until they sort of moved through the Vale of Arryn, through the Riverlands, and then finally reaching the Reach. And very broadly, they decided, well, we'll just sort of adapt. We'll welcome them in. We'll marry them into our families so that they don't then wish to attack us. Some of them adopted their religion, the faith of the Seven. Eventually, they pretty much all did down there. And they made this a welcoming environment. So the Andal invasion didn't feel like an invasion so much when we come to the Reach. And the Andals brought with them their traditions, that they brought with them their religion, and they brought with them their chivalric codes. And it was in the Reach that these reached, pun not really intended, their heights. Now, you will get the Knights of the Vale claiming that they were sort of the first and the best and things like that, but really nobody doubts that if you're there looking for tourneys, if you're there looking for what this kind of idealized chivalric life is like, it's the Reach. Now, we've talked all our way through this without mentioning the big families. I'll just we can talk about more as we go along, but I'll just mention three to start with. The first is House Gardner. House Gardner claim descent, as many do, from Garth Greenhand and Garth Greenhand's first son, Garth Gardner, Garth the Gardener. All of they took the surname Gardner after that, and they based themselves in Highgarden. Now, they had, after some time, they realized that they needed stewards, basically hands of the king, to be looking after their kingdom, and that's where the Tyrells came in. The Tyrells served as eternal stewards. So after 2, 3 of the Tyrells in a row had proven to be worthy, this then turned from being well, who do I choose as my steward? Well, who's the next Tyrell to come along? So the Tyrells were, for thousands of years, they were not quite the second in command, but they were the people who administered the Reach. And they did intermarry with the Gardeners, I think 10 times over the years as well. So when you get to the Targaryen invasion, Aegon's invasion, and you get to the Field of Fire, where House Gardner, along with the Lannisters as well, but the Reach tried to oppose the dragons and found out the hard and hot way that that's not a very good idea. The Gardeners were wiped out, but back home at the base, the stewards, the Tyrells, were still there. And so when Aegon comes up to Highgarden, the Tyrells, understandably, they just fling open the gates and say, "Welcome, our new lords and masters, come this way." And as a result, Aegon chose the Tyrells to be Lord's Protector of the Reach. Now, this didn't go down particularly well with quite a few of the other major houses there in the Reach. They felt that they had nobler ancestry. They felt that they had a better claim, but it was Aegon's choice, and what Aegon chose whenever he had to do this kind of thing was who was most likely to be loyal to him. And the people who'd proven their loyalty were the Tyrells, who had not been there on the Field of Fire, so they'd not opposed the Targaryens at all. These other houses had been there. So the Tyrells took over as heads, Lords Paramount of the Reach, but quite a few of the other lords consider them up-jumped stewards, basically. Now, the situation isn't quite as bad as in the Riverlands, where the Tullys really did never gain the respect of the other major lords. The Tyrells have gained the respect, but there is still a kind of a simmering grudge going on there from several of the houses. Perhaps the most important other house, though, well, definitely the most important other house, who didn't seem to really question this, were the Hightowers. The Hightowers, based out of Old Town, are possibly, in fact, George R. Martin has said, they are the oldest house in all of Westeros. And Old Town is the oldest settlement in all of Westeros. How old is Old Town? We don't know. It certainly seems to have been one of the first places that, when the first men came across that land bridge into Dawn, one of the first places they made their way across to, but Old Town seems to predate that. It seems to have been a trading port of some kind for quite a while, with the peoples who were the children of the forest, the giants who were there in Westeros beforehand. It sits at the mouth of the Great River, and basically it offers the way in to the most lush, fertile land in all of Westeros, so it makes for a natural trading port. And the base of the High Tower is really ancient. It's made of this fused black stone that is quite mysterious, and nobody really knows where it came from. We haven't seen it yet in person in the book, so our judgment will probably have to wait on that one. But it seems to be made perhaps from the same kind of fused stone as you might see in the Five Forts, all the way over in the sort of far east of Yi Ti. It's a bit similar to the Valyrian fused black stone, but a different style. So maybe an older version of that. It seems a little bit similar to some of the oily black stone, like the sea stone chair, but it doesn't seem, as far as we can tell, it doesn't seem to be oily in feel or appearance. So it's a little bit of a mystery. Some people connect it over to the maze makers of Lorath, which is a whole other thing. What we do know is it's very ancient. And the High Towers were the first lords there, and they built towers on top of it. First of all, wooden towers, which were mainly just so they could put a signal beacon up there, a lighthouse basically, to guide people into the port. But then eventually they decided to actually build a proper stone tower on top. And the high towers in Old Town built up the largest and most important settlement town city in all of Westeros. It was for millennia. This was undeniably the center of Westerosi culture, civilization. This is the center of learning. The Maesters, the Citadel was set up there. The Maesters were based there. When the Andals came over, they proactively established the Starry Sept to create the spiritual center of of Westeros. This was where the Faith of the Seven based itself, and this was the richest town city. Yes, you would get richer individual families and richer areas in the Westerlands, but as a place, as a whole, this was where it was at, and that is where it stayed for a very, very, very long time until relatively recently, couple of hundred years or so before the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire, when King's Landing had been established and grew, and the Great Sept was built, and so there was a kind of a shift of focus for where the religious centre was. The Grand Maester was established as a role to be advising the king of the Seven Kingdoms, shifting over to King's Landing, and so Old Town remained this great cultural hub, but no longer was it the largest city, and no longer was it the center of everything. But through all this time, the High Towers, and I'll do a stream some point just on the High Towers because they're absolutely fascinating. Through all this time, the High Towers didn't really get expansionist. They didn't go too political, warlike. They largely seemed to care just about staying in control of their city and keeping their influence through all the different avenues that they'd had. Okay, let's. That's a sort of a very broad overview of the reach, and let's go. So Weirwood Network has become a member and gifted 5 memberships. Well, thank you so much. I hugely appreciate that. For those who don't know about the Members Club, the best way, if you wish to support this channel, is through Patreon. There's a link somewhere, probably down in the description. That's why I prioritize patrons' questions. But if for whatever reason you don't wish to go to Patreon, then you can become a channel member here. Yeah, you get things highlighted there in the chat, and I'm much more likely to see it. So let's go to a question from Lady Vaughan-Strauss, saying, "Greetings, Robert the Human and Dan the Dog, and to you. Between the legends of Garth Greenhand and its natural fecundity, how have the weirwood trees fared in the Reach? Are there more, fewer, average? Do the ones which remain benefit from this ideal environment? Did the Greenhand clan have any particular issues with the weirwoods and the Children of the Forest?" And you also asked about which well-told tale. For those who don't know, I've got another channel called The Well Told Tale when I read audiobooks. And we're currently doing The First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells, which is a fantastic story. But you wanted to know something with a more Halloween theme. You were wondering about The Hanging Stranger by Philip K. Dick or The Thing from Outside by George Allen England. Both are really fun short stories. I adore Philip K. Dick. He's one of my favourite authors. That story, while disconcerting, is probably not as natural a horror as The Thing from Outside, which was at the time an incredibly well received story, one of the most famous fantasy horror stories out there. In fact, Weird Tales, if you know your fantasy sci-fi history, which was probably the most important influential short story magazine, um, the main story, the first story, I think, even on that, was The Thing from Outside as a reprint. So, yes, go for that, or have a browse around. Lots of Edgar Allan Poe, lots of Lovecraft on there as well. But in terms of weirwood trees in the Reach, now we're not told huge amounts. In fact, it's probably fair to say that we do go to the Reach bit in Dunk and Egg, more on that in a moment. But in the main story, we've not spent much time in the Reach, it has to be said. We've not been to Highgarden yet. We've just had a chapter really in Old Town. So we've not spent huge amounts of time there. So we've not had huge amounts of evidence of, oh, here's a weirwood tree and here's a weirwood tree. We know of two weirwood trees. There's definitely one, Sam sees it in the oldest part of, what appears to be the oldest part of the Citadel, when he sees that there. There are also, in Highgarden, we know there are three weirwood trees that grow really close to each other, and so close that it almost looks like they're just one tree, and they're known as the Three Singers. So those are the only two that we really know about specifically. In terms of overall history, this was First Men. All of this was First Men. It did convert, by and large, pretty much entirely over to the Faith of the Seven. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that everybody chopped their weirwood trees down. It will mean that quite a few did, but the Andals, having reached the Reach, they kind of reciprocated the way that the Reach houses opened up in a kind of a spirit of welcome and friendliness. And the citizens of the Reach adopted a huge amount of the customs of the Andals, and the Andals in turn weren't all wanting to just cut down the weirwood trees. They were open to the idea that if there was a weirwood tree there, is it part of your ancient culture? Then yes, of course you can keep it. So there are definitely fewer than there are in the north, and there are definitely fewer than there are, as far as we can tell, in the Riverlands, because in the Riverlands there are still quite a few families dotted around there, particularly in that kind of like crescent in the kind of the north of the Riverlands. There are still quite a few weirwood trees around there, but there will be some, basically. Not out in the wild. There are still some places like the Rainwood where you can still find the occasional weirwood tree out in the wild, but more sort of kept as part of cultural ancestral history. So they will grow well, but they're not worshipped. The people no longer worship the old god. Let's go to Hermione, saying the Maesters and the Citadel seem to have their own opinions on magic and the Targaryens. Get rid of it. How do the Hightowers fit in? They have tremendous influence in the Reach, and especially in Old Town. Do they support the Maesters, or do they secretly oppose them? Well, this is an interesting one, because the short answer is that the Hightowers sponsor the Citadel. So the high towers are inextricably linked in with the citadel and the maesters. They bankroll them. The high towers set them up. It was a high tower, um, uh, Percival the Twisted, I forget his exact name, who was a son of Lord Hightower, who he wasn't going to live long, but what he loved was learning and discussing things. And so, as a sort of a gift to a dying son, really, um, Lord Hightower brought a whole load of these learned people from, or learned men from around the world, and gave them a bit of land there in the citadel in Old Town, which became the citadel. And so the High Towers set this up in the first place. And as you read through the history, particularly in things like Fire and Blood, you see again and again how the High Towers are very strongly linked in with the maesters. There are High Towers who go off and become maesters. So, and the same goes in with the Faith of the Seven. There's such a strong link in there between the High Towers and Faith of the Seven. However, we shouldn't see this as just the High Towers are just pulling the strings, and they're in charge of this, and the Maesters do what the High Towers say, because there are certainly hints that the High Towers, certainly now in the story, we hear Leighton Hightower allegedly is he studies magic, which seems to imply that he's not a 100% in line with all of the Maester's views on magic. So I think what we should probably do is say the High Towers, and we can leave the Dance of the Dragons to one side because that's a whole completely different thing. But as a whole, the High Towers are pragmatically trying to protect their city and keep the influence of themselves and the organizations that they support without necessarily always agreeing with every single thing that is said. You can see this incidentally with the faith as well. The faith, when you go look at the role of the faith vis-a-vis the Targaryens, it varies hugely. So sometimes you'd have a High Septon who was ranting and raving against the Targaryens. Sometimes you'd have one who was basically a lickspittle, as the word often used within Fire and Blood, and often somewhere in between. That doesn't mean that the High Tower's political position shifted along with them always, but it did mean that if they ever went too extreme one way or the other, then maybe the High Septon would have an accident or something like that. So it's almost as if the High Towers, they're not in charge of controlling these organizations, but they are keeping them within the boundaries of what they think is acceptable. Right, let's have a quick flick into the chat. Rhoda Leader saying, "Hey peeps, sending love to the moderators who keep this chat a safe space." Yes, let's do the love to the moderators to start with. If you're in the chat watching this live, the moderators are the people who zap the trolley comments, who keep the chat going, who welcome new people. They are amazing, really fantastic, absolute stars. Could you just show them a little bit of love there in the chat? I would hugely appreciate that. Michelle Ramos saying there has to be some sort of contact with people from the great empire of the Dawn. They had the ability to create that, and well, the High Towers I think came from there. They had mariners. Yeah, so this is where did the original High Towers and Old Town come from? Is there a connection across far off to the east? I instinctively, I think that's probably right. Instinctively, it feels like Old Town predates the first men coming into Westeros. There was a trading post there already, and there was to my mind, I did ages ago, I did a video about the different types of blackstone. But to my mind, which I think has come down, I will put back up again at some point. To my mind, the base of the high tower, that fused black stone, that feels like a predecessor of the Valyrian fused black stone, an early version of it, which does seem to imply it doesn't come necessarily from the Valyrians, but from civilizations that were before the Valyrians, proto-Valyrians or something like that. So yes, that makes absolute sense that they may well have sailed all the way over. We certainly know that with House Dane, sorry, how did I forget that? House Dane, they are of a different ethnicity, and that they came from the east, from Essos somewhere, so they were not just standard first men. And that, if you look at the map, I don't know whether it's you can see it on the map here. Yes, just about. If you sort of go along the coast from Old Town, just along a bit, the next in bit, that is Starfall there, and that is where House Dane are based. So it's actually not that far. So it makes absolute perfect sense to me that is the way that these things worked. Is before the First Men invasion, as it were, there were some connections across to the civilizations in the Far East. Let's go to Levac saying, hopefully Robert will pick this up. Last live stream, I voiced the opinion that the red wines are one of the friends in the Reach. I'd love to hear who I think the friends of the Reach are and why. I'm going to do a video on that. I meant to write that down last time. I did spot the comment and think, oh yes, because I'm doing a sort of very long, slow series of videos, some with history of Westeros, looking at Varys and the big Varys plan with Aegon the Sixth, and all that. I've just finished writing the most recent one, which is looking at Varys's informant network, basically. But we've got previous versions of that. What are Varys' motivations? A lot of his early work in laying the groundwork within King's Landing for his upcoming invasion, for that's what it is. But later on, who these friends in the Reach might be, I think is quite an interesting question. For those who don't know, then this comes from when he comes down to talk to the Golden Company, and it's the discussion, well, who else is going to be supporting this? He's not got it. When he first arrives down there, he heads down, we see his team. It's the Shy Maid, less Tyrion, obviously, who's left them by this point, but it's John Connington, it's the whole gang. Actually, there's only like 4 or 5 of them, but that's kind of got the makings of a proto small council, but he needs an army. And so he goes to get the Golden Company, but then the discussion is, okay, yeah, the Golden Company are great, but do you want them to invade an entire continent? You will need to have support in Westeros. And then the thought comes up, well, we've got friends in the Reach. Who might they be? I think. I mean, I'm going to follow this train of logic down, so I will give a full answer when I do that video. I think that's a possibility. I think it doesn't seem likely to be the Tyrells. I think that the High Towers, that they're very big and important, but it's more likely to be a number of these medium-sized, slightly disgruntled families who feel that maybe they've got a better claim to the being Lords Paramount of the Reach in the Tyrells. So those are the groups that we need to be looking at, I think. But I will, as I say, I'm going to do a full video on that one, so keep an eye out for that at some point. Okay, let's go to Fred saying the Reach is probably the richest kingdom because of its agriculture, but it's also the most boring kingdom. Well, it's listed as the second, or listed as George R. R. Martin doesn't really write lists like this, but it's generally accepted to be the second richest behind the Westerlands. That's just because the Westerlands has got gold. But it certainly seems to have the most people. It certainly seems to have the best agriculture and the most trade and most developed economy, you'd say. And whereas I'm sure there's sort of arts and culture spread right across the Seven Kingdoms, the Reach is where we kind of hear more about that as a pastime. In the north, they're far more focused in on how do we prepare for and survive the winter when it's coming in. The Iron Islanders have got their own things that they're really wanting to focus on. You kind of get the impression that left to their own devices, the people of the Reach would be very happily just having tourneys and singing songs and just having a lovely life. Whenever I get asked, as I do from time to time, where in the Seven Kingdoms I'd like to live, I think the only real answer is in the Reach. Maybe Old Town because it's so amazing. Maybe in Highgarden because it's incredibly beautiful and the standard of living seems nice. Yeah, it seems like a really nice place to live. Boring, maybe from a story perspective, but they probably don't think it is. Let's go to Kelly Summers, saying we hear a lot about the Riverlands being constantly torn apart by wars, partly due to its centrality and its agricultural potential. With the North largely staying out of goings-on below the neck, though, the Reach is nearly as central and is also known for prime farmlands. Was it as highly contested and war-torn further back in history? And if not, why? Did the Gardeners, High Towers, Red Wines, etc., have a good enough power balance to be secure without much infighting? Well, there was infighting and there were wars, both within what we know as the Reach, but also with Dawn and the Westerlands and even the Stormlands. Pardon me. But I think that the one way of looking at this is to look at a while before we get the Targaryen invasion. Old Town got hit 3 times in, I think it was 3 times in a century. They got raided really badly from the sea and overland. And the High Towers made the decision, okay, well, this is going to cost a lot, but we need to protect ourselves. So they built a massive wall around the outside of the city, and they basically went to the House Gardener and cut a deal, which was along the lines of, okay, well, we'll swear fealty to you if you're protecting us overland. And yeah, in return, here's this sea power we've got, and you largely let us run Old Town. And they cut this deal. It's presented more as a kind of a bending the knee thing, but it really is just a deal. And the High Towers then felt, we're now safe. We've got our walls. We've got somebody who can protect us from land attacks. And so now, really, all we need to do is make sure that we're defended enough from the sea. And sure enough, after that, Old Town became a whole lot harder to actually invade, and wasn't raided for a very long time afterwards. And that's the kind of pragmatic feel that has kept the Reach as it was. It didn't have this one strong family who were always in charge, like you had the Lannisters in the Westerlands, for example. The Gardeners were in charge, but you can argue that for a very long time, most of that time, the High Towers were equally powerful as them. but they didn't have that vying for control. And that, I think, is probably where you see the difference. The Riverlands, people were always going through them to get to other places and raiding them because it's quite easy. In the Reach, they kind of worked out how to get along, and even the gardeners had established a functional way of governing with their stewards. We don't really hear about these kind of permanent stewards elsewhere. This seems a very Reach thing. Um, these guys are good at this. They can therefore be in charge. Um, so, friend saying the Reach has to be more war torn in the last two books. I don't know how it couldn't. The North, Riverlands, and the Vale will be out of the Cersei Euron, Fagon Danny business. Reach is the centre ground. Yeah, absolutely, it will, and we will get onto that in a little bit, I'm sure. But we haven't had, as I say, the main point I think we have to keep on coming back to is that we haven't had POV chapters really in the Reach, or the Westerlands for that matter. The south and west of Westeros has not been in the story. We hear about what's going on in Castle Rock or High Garden or Old Town, but we do not see it. Now, however, we're reaching a point where Sam's going, or Sam has arrived down there, so that's definitely happening. Euron's doing things, and we've got a POV character in Aaron who we can see what's happening with him down there as well. So we will get action happening down there. Martin S. saying, "Evening, Robert. The first time I heard Old Town, I kind of got a little confused, thinking it was a historical original part of a city, perhaps King's Landing. That's how Old Town is often used. It is often used like that. George R. R. Martin uses this for not just the part of the city, but as you know, I'm sure it's for the whole place. And what is fascinating in terms of it being Old Town, nobody sort of disputes the fact. Nobody says, "Oh, but there's an older town here somewhere." This is so old that they don't even know where or how or when, or they know where, but they don't know when it was founded or why. Some of the names of things they have down there. So the High Tower itself is on an island, and that island is called Battle Isle. Nobody knows why. Surely that it means there must have been a battle on that island that was significant enough to name the island after it. But what that battle was, who was fighting in it, who won, we simply do not know. How old that base of the High Tower has been there, I don't know. How long before the first men arrived was there this trading port? We don't know. And so that, I think, is what he's trying to get here, is that this is it's the oldest bit, really, not just of like the Reach, but all of Westeros. Fred saying in the Netherlands there are at least three small towns called Udorp, which I'm sure I've mispronounced, but it means old village. Yeah. Um, let's go to a question from Rassler saying, "Was it Mace Tyrell's idea to siege Storm's End and essentially sit the war out while appearing to participate? Was it Elena Tyrell being the real strategist behind this plan? And did this choice cost the Loyalists the war?" Okay, so this is a Robert's Rebellion question, and it's a really good one. I really enjoy talking about this because the war was it took a while getting started, it has to be said. And the armies of the rebellion were quite disparate. They were quite spread out. The rebellion started in the Vale, and we had John Arryn there, and he took a while gathering his army together because some significant parts like Goldtown still supported the Targaryens. So he took a little while to gather that together. Then Ned had to get all the way up to the north, call his banners, which takes an age, and then march all the way down, which takes another age. And Robert Baratheon also wasn't in the Stormlands, which is where his home base was. And so he had to get across to the Stormlands, call his banners, deal with a small rebellion amongst his own men. And then the plan was, if you imagine a map of in fact, you don't have to imagine them. I've got one in front of me. The plan here is from Storm's End, which is sort of like off the sort of the right of the map here on the coast, that they would meet up with Ned and the Northern Army, and also with the army from the Vale, up in Riverrun, with a view to, which is sort of the northern-ish parts of the Riverlands, and with a view to forming a mass army. Robert Baratheon had to get his army from the Stormlands up there, and rather than going straight through the Targaryen heartlands and therefore risk being completely outnumbered, he decided to sort of skirt around the Riverlands and head up through the Riverlands to Riverrun. In so doing, he got to the edges of the Reach, and the Reach, as we've already said, has got the biggest army. And the vanguard of that army was being commanded by Randyll Tarly, who had the reputation, still has in the story, of being probably the greatest commander in Westeros. Randyll Tarly took on Robert Baratheon's army and won. Robert Baratheon's army, this was the only defeat Robert Baratheon had in the entire rebellion. His army was forced to retreat. Mace Tyrell, coming up with his main force a little bit behind, he ordered Randyll Tarly not to press home the advantage. Don't follow them. Don't try and fully defeat them. This allowed Robert Baratheon's army to regroup, and Mace Tyrell then made the decision, actually, we're going to go to Storm's End, where he's come from. So we're going to Robert Baratheon's home castle, and we will besiege that. And they did. They marched all the way across. They allowed Robert Baratheon's army to just sort of head off, meet up with Ned. The Tyrell army, the massive army, headed off over and besieged Storm's End for a whole year. And when I say besiege, what we don't mean is like actively attacking it every day, trying to undermine it, throw some ladders up and do it. None of that kind of business. They literally just sieged it. They set up camp on the fields outside. Olenna Tyrell talks rather disparagingly about him just sort of like feasting there outside Storm's End for a year. They had a naval blockade put in by the Red Wine Fleet, and they largely sat out the war. But they sat out the war in such a way that the Targaryens would not have been able to say, you weren't on our side. So if the Targaryens had won, then the Reach army, the Tyrells, would have been able to turn around and say, well, we won this first famous battle, and then after that we besieged the heartland, Robert Baratheon's heartland. We were doing good. We were doing things on your side. Now, that's a bit disingenuous, because everybody knows that this massive army would have been incredibly useful, not just sitting outside Storm's End, but more useful fighting battles against Robert Baratheon's army, Ned Stark's army, Jon Arryn's army. If they'd been there at the Battle of the Trident, then things may well have been very different, because I think they had like 50,000 soldiers. That this would probably have tipped the balance. The uh, the war was, I mean, I wouldn't say on a knife edge, but the Targaryens could go into the Battle of the Trident thinking that they were going to win, without thinking, oh, this is a forlorn hope. It was the armies were not that mismatched. Having the Tyrells there would have made a huge difference. So the question is that decision to largely sit out the war, but do so in such a way that nobody could really accuse them of anything, because as well as the Targaryens wouldn't be able to accuse them of being disloyal, as happened, the Robert's Rebellion, when it won, they couldn't really say anything much against the Tyrells either, because they'd done their job and their duty, but they hadn't been sort of vociferously out there opposing everything that the Robert Baratheon stood for. They just sieged a castle for a while. So it's a matter of whether or not you think that this was a stupid move that came good, or a very clever move. My instinct is that this was indeed Olenna Tyrell, just behind the scenes, suggesting a way to actually get through this. If you see the players of the game here realize that this was on a knife edge. You had two sides here. You had Robert, Ned, and Jon, and then you had the Targaryens, and they, no matter what, they were going to be fighting each other. There was nothing you could do to persuade either of them. Then you had most of the other players just kind of holding back a bit. The Dornish didn't really want to get involved. Eventually, they had to, when the Mad King started threatening Elia and her daughters. And at that point, they had to get involved. The Lannisters, Tywin Lannister, so that was Doran Martell, and Tywin Lannister, as we know, he sat in Castle Rock and just waited to see who won the decisive battle, and then went in on their side. These actual players of the game held back and waited to see what was going to happen. And the Tyrells, it seems like they did the same. And it's a much bigger question as to whether Mace Tyrell is as big a buffoon as he comes across as. But if he is, then this was definitely Olenna. But either way, I think this was calculated. Let's go to another question from Wrestler, saying, do you think that Garland Tyrell's fate will be in the story? Will he survive? And who will be the Lord of Highgarden at the end of the story? Well, so the Tyrells are a bigger family than they come across on the TV show, is I think the first thing to say. And the TV show, you kind of got the impression that all of the Tyrells up sticks went over to King's Landing, and then we have Loras, and we had Marjorie, and we had Mace, and we had Olenna, and that was largely it for the Tyrells. In the books, it's very clear that they had, there's another couple of brothers. Garland is the second oldest brother. He seems a really good guy, actually. Whenever we come across him, he seems pleasant, he seems insightful, and he also seems to be an incredibly good fighter. Loras, who is recognized as being one of the greatest fighters in the land, says that whereas he personally might be slightly better at the jousting, Garland is better than him at hand-to-hand. It's just that he doesn't really go for the glory, so he doesn't really enter the tourneys, and so people don't really know about this. He apparently actively practices against 3 or 4 opponents at a time, for the reason that he thinks that in a real battle you're more likely to be surrounded by people rather than just sort of one-on-one, and so he wanted to make sure that he was ready for that. He is the person in the books when the army comes in to uh, rescue King's Landing. The Lannister Tyrell army comes in. Somebody's wearing Renly Baratheon's green armor, and it's him. And people say this is the ghost of Renly, but it's not. It's Garland, and he is there right at the leading the forces in. And I say that he comes across really well. He does. He has a word with Tyrion and basically says, I saw what you did with the defences there. I thought that was really good. Well done. At a time when Tyrion was getting no attention at all, really. Everybody was just like ignoring him and making out that really this was his father coming in and saving the day. He's there brokering with Sansa this idea of maybe getting him to marry the other brother. And when she's really quite on her own in King's Landing, we don't really notice it, but he is there and he gives her some kind words as well. So he seems like a nice and good guy and also competent. So what's going to happen? Well, he gets given the estates of House Florent, they're married to Stannis, and so they're basically their lands are taken away from them by the crown. And he is given that, and he's now made the new lord there. So he heads off out from King's Landing to go and claim these lands. However, while he's out there, before he gets to really do anything about it, then he hears about the Shield Islands being attacked, and the Reach are suddenly aware of the threat from Euron. So he starts gathering an army to go off and do something about that. So that's where we kind of leave him. He's never central to the action, but he's always there somewhere in the background, and he seems quietly quite heroic. So what's going to happen to him? I have a feeling that he is going to be one of these central characters in opposing Euron down in the Winds of Winter. He will be possibly leading the Reach army down there. Will he survive? I think it's entirely possible that he might survive. But as for who's going to be the Lord of Highgarden at the end of the story, one of the Tyrells, I think, is probably the right way of putting it. I don't know honestly which Tyrell will survive. Not Marjorie, not Mace. I have a feeling not Elena either. But there are lots of Tyrells, so I think the Tyrells probably will survive. I had a question here from where was it? Reflective Rambling, if I can find it. Pick up a question for Hales. Thank you. I love it when people do this, saying, do you think that Randall Tarley would join forces with Fagon if he believes him to be the king? Would it be just to spite Mace? Okay, so Randall Tarley has sort of come in with the Lannisters. And when Fagon, I think we need to take a step back and say what's going to happen here in terms of the iteration of events, because joining Fagon to spite Mace is probably the wrong way around here, because where we left off at the end of A Dance with Dragons is that we get Kevin Lannister has been murdered. and the Tyrells are framed. Cersei is almost certainly going on from this. We saw what she was like in A Feast for Crows. We know what she's like, and she is almost certainly going to get revenge on the Tyrells. Particularly, she's already there thinking, "How do I get rid of Marjorie?" And she's clearly already very much in love with Wildfire. Whether it's exactly the same as happened on the show, as in blowing up the Great Sept, it wouldn't surprise me if it's that. But something along those lines, Cersei is going to be doing to get rid of the threat from the Faith and the High Sparrow, and the threat from the Tyrells as she sees it. Now, when that happens, Mace, who is a family man, is going to be livid. Now, Mace has headed out. We get reports he's headed out down to Storm's End, which has, again, we have reports, fallen to Fagon. So what does Mace do when he gets to Storm's End? We know what he did last time. He just camps outside. He's not really a great war leader, but he has gone down there with a big force. Now, what might happen when they get there? Well, news comes to him that Cersei has, and he might not know it's Cersei, but I think he'll be pretty clear, has killed Marjorie and taken on the Faith of the Seven and basically gone full Mad Queen. What does he do? Well, maybe he joins forces with Fagon, because Fagon is going to be there to try and overthrow Cersei. So actually, suddenly he's going to be on Cersei's side. So so what we then might find is that we get Fagon, who comes to take King's Landing, who finds himself with an alliance with the Tyrells and with Dawn. This turns from being just like this tiny invasion to, oh, actually, you've got quite a lot of support going on here. So what will Mace Tyrell, not Mace Tyrell, what will Randyll Tarly do? Would he join forces with Fagon? I think he probably would be told to. Whether he would do is another matter, I think, because I think he does. He instinctively doesn't like Mace, and instinctively would want to be on the other side if he thought that he would survive. Let's go to a question from Wilma Hunter. I've mispronounced that, I know. Quanta? But anyway, thank you very much. Saying, "Hi, Robert. Hope everything is well. Long time since I dropped a super chat. Thank you. Do you think Sam will claim or steal Heartsbane to use against the others? Will he give it to some great fighter, like in the show?" Possibly. So he's down in where we've left this in the books. Is he's arrived in Old Town. His plan is he's going to take Gilly, drop her off with his family. His dad's not there, and they will probably welcome her in and go, "Okay, fine. So you're going off you're in the Night's Watch. You're going to go to the Old Town. Okay, we'll find her somewhere here." So that seems the same as what happened on the show so far. Sam will spend some time in Old Town, but then at some point, Euron's going to start attacking it, and probably off the back of that, Sam will have to escape. And maybe by that point, he's discovered some great bit of knowledge that he thinks will help up north. Maybe he sees what's happening up at the wall and thinks, actually, I need to go back up there. Anyway he goes, I think he will go back and pick up Gilly. It makes 100% sense that he might as he has grown as a character, and as he now thinks and knows that one of the few things which we know is going to be effective against the army of the dead is Valyrian steel, it makes sense that yes, he will take it. Now, I don't know that. It's what happened on the show, but that's one of those things that happened on the show that I thought, oh, yeah, I can see that happening. Maybe not in exactly the way they showed it, but something along those lines. When he gets up to the wall, if we follow this train of logic, and the further down the train of logic we go, then the more likely there are other random things happen. But when he gets up to the wall, is he going to be there saying, right, I've now got a Valyrian steel sword, let me at them? No. He would probably give this to Jon and say, distribute this to who, well, if Jon's around at the time, obviously, distribute this to who you think will make best use of it. But yeah, let me know in the chat. I saw somebody there saying it's a nice idea, but it wouldn't really work. The question is that Randall is not there. He's off in the Riverlands right now. So if he's not there, would Sam steal it? I think it's possible. Derry's read it before, saying maybe Fagon helps against the Walkers too. Randall would then be a player in that battle. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. The thing is, though, that what we've got is he's not really engaged with the idea about what's going on up the wall yet. Nobody really in the South has. His focus is on claiming the Iron Throne. And so for a goodly part of this next bit of the story, that's what's going to be happening. And I suspect that by the end of the Winds of Winter, he is going to be in place in King's Landing, at which point Dany is going to be arriving. She is also, although she is increasingly going to be having people telling her about this. She's got so the Red Priests are now going to be coming on. Okoro is going to be coming on to her side to try and basically say you're the chosen one. You're Azor Ahai reborn. So she will start getting this, but her focus, I suspect, will still remain. I need to reclaim my throne first, particularly if they rediscover this old prophecy. This is quite a digression away from the Reach, so I'll keep this short. George R. R. Martin has told us that this, or probably I should be more exact, the showrunners, Ryan Condal, told us that it came from George R. R. Martin, this original idea that Aegon the Conqueror had this vision of the White Walkers or the others, which is what prompted him to invade. Now, we don't know all the ins and outs of the detail that he might have said here, but this does come from him, which means that something like this is happening in the books. On the show, the way they went with this was emphasizing heavily that the role for Aegon was to unite the Seven Kingdoms and for a Targaryen to be sitting on the throne. And that matches up really well with what we know from Aegon and his and what he did. He went in, he tried to conquer all of the parts of the Seven Kingdoms as they would be, and he had a crown which that was on the show, but he swore he got pronounced king of the Rhoynar. Basically, he was king. He said that he was the king of the Dornish even before he'd managed to invade them. So that all kind of matches up. If Dany gets to hear about this somehow, and how might she get to hear about this somehow? Well, if Shira Seastar is Quaithe, got a video on that coming out tomorrow, incidentally, then maybe she might say, or there's another possibility, which is a thing that George R. R. Martin said a while ago in answer to a question about those books. Do you remember way back in book 1? Jorah gave her 3 books of ancient Targaryen knowledge or something. And someone asked a really quite insightful question. Um, has she ever read them? Uh, because we don't really hear about them. And George R. R. Martin said, "That's a good question. She's not really much of a reader, actually, is Dany. But do you know who is? Tyrion. And do you know who's heading down to Marine right now? Tyrion." And so the clear implication is that Tyrion is going to be reading those books. What is he going to discover in them? Well, maybe a little bit more about dragon lore, maybe some hint of this prophecy. Because if those books were not just family heirlooms that Jorah took with him from Bear Island, and why on earth would House Mormont have ancient Targaryen books? Then these are things that he picked up in Essos, and they therefore won't have been destroyed by Baelor the Blessed or whoever else we might blame for the loss of this um, prophecy. So it may well be preserved, in those books. It's a long, quite sort of nuanced take, but I think there's a fair chance when Dany arrives that she will have at least a reasonable idea about this. It's just that she probably doesn't know that time is happening right now until someone from the wall comes down and talks to her personally. But the short version of this is that Fagon will not know or won't know the seriousness of it. Dany may know, but may not take it seriously in the first instance. Which took us a long way from the Reach. But okay, well, let's head back there now. So Rassler saying, House Hightower appear to have been making ready for Euron's imminent attack behind the scenes, but how successful do you think they would be? As it would seem Euron will have to be at least somewhat successful in his attack on Old Town. Well, they have been preparing. So Lord Hightower, Leighton Hightower, has basically sent his sons out to be doing the preparing. He sent one of them's out building more ships. One of them's improving the harbour defences. One of them he sent all the way over to Lys to try and get some sails to basically boost his navy. So he's been sending out a lot of people to do a lot of things, and he's also allegedly up there at the top of his tower preparing magic, studying magic. So something's going to be happening. I think there's often a little bit of confusion about when this might happen. The battle that Euron is seemingly preparing for at the beginning of the Winds of Winter, we've got a pre-release chapter from Aaron's perspective. That is not, as far as we can tell, a raid on Old Town. He is sort of holding back and waiting for the royal fleet to come around, and he's going to be doing a massive sea battle first. Once that happens, then we might get the attack on Old Town. In terms of the success or otherwise, I think we have to try and understand what success looks like to Euron. Euron is not there saying, I'm going to conquer all of Westeros, and the first thing I'm going to do is sit down in Old Town and rule wisely from there. No, he's going to burn Westeros down, and then he's going to rule the ashes. That, and be god of the ashes, in fact. That's what he's wanting to do. And so he's not there wanting to capture Old Town. He's wanting to destroy it. That would send a message to everyone. Even Old Town can't escape. I've dealt with the Shield Islands, dealt with the big fleet coming at me. Now I'm just going to destroy Old Town. If he burns the Citadel, if he topples the High Tower, if he does something dramatic like that, people will notice. And that is what he's wanting. Gilio saying the maesters' roles as advisors to lords, arbiters of knowledge, and silent manipulators seems to overlap with the real-life medieval clergy. How come the faith lost this battle for influence to a semi-secular institution? So the timing here is that they didn't lose that role. The maesters had that role to start with. The maesters predate the Faith of the Seven coming to Westeros. So the maesters were there already and offering out their services to people. And then the Faith of the Seven came over. And in terms of who do you want, most big lords, they will have a septon in their castle, and they will have a maester. And then they may well have both of them in their sort of inner council. But who are you going to get to be teaching your children? The person who's done all of the learning, except for some things that particular septon or scepter can teach them. So, as an example, in Winterfell, you get Maester Lewin, who does a lot of teaching of the Stark children, but also you get the Scepter there, who is she is involved in teaching particularly Arya and Sansa lots of sort of more womanly skills, as it were, how to do the stitching and things like that. So most big lords, sort of lords of large castles and households, would have both, and then the work would be distributed between them, but with the weight given to the maesters in terms of teaching the things that they have learned, which is about the Seven Kingdoms. It's about maths. It's about histories, that kind of thing. That is the stuff that the Maester teaches. So that was there already. Then the Septons came in afterwards. So Ranabin Mitra saying, in the House of the Undying, Dany gets told that from a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing shadow fire. Also, Melisandre sees a tower crumbling into the sea in her flames and mistakenly thinks that to be Hardhome. Therefore, is this what will happen to Euron after his siege of Old Town and the destruction of the High Tower? And you say in a recent video with Aziz about the Mad King, I speculated that the Mad King genuinely believed in being in turning into a dragon. Aerion Brightflame probably believed the same thing. So is it possible that we get Leighton Hightower and his daughter Malora, or Malora, I never really know how to pronounce that, that they could be doing something the same? And you credit Amanda, the Disputed Lands, and David Lightbringer for that. I've not seen their videos on this one, so I don't know what they say or what evidence they've got there. I do like, and I sort of vaguely referenced it a little bit earlier, I do like this idea about the Fallen Tower, the High Tower. So we get this from a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, Melisandre seeing a tower crumbling into the sea. It is certainly possible, as somewhere that is about to be attacked with a very notable tower, that we are talking about the High Tower. If that does fall, what will come out of it? Surely the High Towers will have some kind of defense mechanism. So I do like the idea of there being some great stone monster that is there in the High Tower. If only because it kind of supports my longer term thought about what happens in the Crypts of Winterfell, which is that the statues will come to life there and rise up out of the ground, and that is what that magic is. And I think that this would sort of foreshadow that a bit. If out of a tower collapsing then comes some kind of great stone sort of monster in some way, a stone beast taking wing, breathing shadow fire, not a real dragon, but this would sort of fulfill a whole load of prophecies. It will make people wonder what on earth is going on down there. I always come back to this thought that every book in A Song of Ice and Fire brings it more and more high fantasy. Book one, other than the prologue, the very last bit when dragons get born, and a chapter or so with Bran having dreams, is very low fantasy. People hardly even believe in magic. It doesn't play a part in the story at all. Book two, we start seeing a bit from Melisandre, just a few things dropped in here and there. Book three, four, five, as we go along, we're getting more and more magic. We're getting the dragons are growing stronger. We're getting tree wizards. We're getting prophecies. All of these things happening all over the place. By the time we get towards the end of this, the magic is going to be right skyrocketing. So expect magical defenses for Old Town. And Clubhouse not saying what goes up must come down. Bye bye wall. Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing is, so the other echo here is that what are the things that we're told Bran the Builder built? Winterfell, the Wall, the High Tower, maybe Storm's End. This would work if we get them all collapsing. Winterfell's already been destroyed. What if the High Tower falls? The Wall is destroyed. Is there a chance Storm's End's going to get destroyed? Well, yeah, I mean, there's certainly going to be battles and things happening over there. So all of these things, if they were all built at roughly the same time by roughly the same person, for them all to fall does kind of work. And the fall of the High Tower, as it's symbolically connected to the wall, because we're told you can see the wall from the top of the High Tower, almost certainly not physically, but you can. The connection is made between those two things and who was supposed to have built them, and so the collapse of that does foreshadow, echo perhaps what may happen to the wall. Right, let's go to which is my next question. Diego Godoy saying, do you think that Elena Tyrell could play a role in a future Duncan Egg story? Yes, 100%. In fact, I'll go as far as to say she should, assuming we get that far in the stories, because it will be quite a bit later. So, Elena Tyrell, the Duncan Egg stories, in terms of timing, the Duncan Egg stories are far enough back that the world seems quite different to the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. But so even in the very beginning, we start to see a few characters that are very, very old in A Song of Ice and Fire, are very, very young in Duncan Egg. We hear talk of Maester Aemon. He's Egg's brother. There's a passing reference to Walder Frey. We see Walder Frey as a snotty-nosed kid, obnoxious even then. You get these passing references to these characters. As we go through the story, we get closer and closer to the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire, and more of these characters will start appearing, and we will start seeing them in their younger forms. And one of those people who will be around will be Elena Tyrell. She won't be Elena Tyrell at the time, she'll be Elena Redwine. Now, when I say that she should definitely be involved somewhere along the line, is that when Egg becomes king, he has this thought that he wants to be a good king. He wants to bind the seven kingdoms together. And he seems to, initially at least, we don't know what happens. He does seem to go through a little bit of a character shift um, that we see through the histories, but we haven't yet seen in the Dunk and Egg stories themselves. Um, he seems not to want his children to marry each other in the way that previous Targaryens and future Targaryens do. And so he arranges marriages. He has 4 children. He arranges marriages for his 4 children um, to lords and ladies around the land. Now, the one which gets the most attention is his eldest son, Duncan, who gets engaged to the daughter of the Lord Baratheon, the Laughing Storm. And that gets broken off when Duncan, who's the crown prince at the time, he just goes off and marries Jenny of Oldstones. So that's a significant story. That will almost certainly then Dunk goes off and has to do a one-on-one combat, a trial by combat over this. It gets quite messy, and that will almost certainly be a Dunk and Egg story. But one of the other people who was due to be married was his son Daeron, and the person he was engaged to was Elena Redwine. Now, they were still very young at the time, but that got called off because, well, the strong hint is that Daeron was gay, and Elena realized this and didn't want to marry him. That's sort of what we're told so far. What happens to her, though, is that another one of these marriages was with another daughter, proposed marriages, Shera. Not Shira, Shera, Shaera. She was engaged to Luthor Tyrell, and then that got split up because Shera then married her brother. So what does Elena do? Well, the two, they're not really spurned lovers, but the 2 people who should have been marrying Targaryens and they miss out on that opportunity marry each other. So Elena marries Luthor Tyrell, and that is how she then becomes the matriarch of the Tyrells. Incidentally, Luthor Tyrell seems like quite a interesting, fun character. She seems to remember him reasonably fondly, and although she is quite disdainful of him sort of being a little bit distracted by stuff, the extent to which apparently the way he died was he was on some kind of hunting trip, hawking on his horseback, and he was looking up in the skies and didn't even notice that he was riding his horse off the edge of a cliff. Apparently so. Whether or not that's actually what happened, we do not know. But she sort of, the story gets repeated in a kind of an almost loving way. But yeah, so that's how she married into the Tyrells. And almost certainly we will see her in the future, Dunk and Egg. Let's go to Sir Friend saying, "Happy Thursday, Robert, and to you too. What do you see in Randall Tarley's future? His storyline on the show, jumping ship from the Tyrells to follow Cersei, doesn't sit well with me. Maybe he'll support Fagon against the foreign invaders, but how will he be defeated, given the emphasis on him being a military genius? Is it just that simple, that he could lose to the Dothraki on an open field? Also, who will wield Heartsbane in the book against the others if Jorah gets Longclaw? Best wishes, warmest regards, and to you." Heartsbane I've already covered. In terms of what does he do? Well, to say at the moment he is being relatively loyal to the Lannisters. I suspect that he will realise if he gets that far, he will realise that Cersei is not the person that he wishes to hitch his wagon to. I suspect we'll get to a point where he will not want to be supporting her. He will think that she is not the a long-term solution here. So perhaps he will just stick with the Tyrells. That's one option there. That will mean that he's then supporting Fagon. And if he can then be given command of some armies against Dany, that would then lead us into how he might end up being somebody who gets burned by Dany, which is obviously what happened on the show. I don't think it will happen exactly the same way it happened on the show, but yeah, I like the idea of him being a part of the people going to fight against the army of the dead up north, and him being praised as this great military commander. But as we covered, I think it was last week, the fighting against the others is not it's not going to be like a normal battle, because if you just send your forces against them, then they'll just send them back at you. So you actually have to do things in a completely different way. Now, maybe Jon's going to be clever enough to figure out how to do that. Maybe Randall Tarley is not going to believe these things. He certainly wouldn't believe, I suspect, what his son Sam will be telling him. So there's a lot of potential there for him to sort of good storytelling potential for him to be up at the wall and not wanting to listen to his son, and therefore doing what should be good tactics, but in a bad way because it's against the others. But I just have this feeling that he will die. He will die before then, probably. I think against Dany. They did that on the show. Maybe that's where they'll get to on the in the books. Right. Let's have Kelly Summers saying, "What if Euron is a shaggy dog story? Ironborn are dead and will never die, but we burn the dead and ships of wood. Victarion is becoming stone, though. Yeah, Victarion Victarion's not long for this world. What if Euron is a shaggy dog story? In as much as he's a long and interesting story that doesn't amount to much in the end. I mean, maybe, but my instinct is that's no. My instinct is that he is going to play the role. I mean, I've talked about this many times, but I think my instinct is he's going to play the role of kind of the tertiary villain. Once we've dealt with the others, once we've dealt with the dragons, because the dragons need to be dealt with somehow, in some way, then who's left? Everybody's collapsing around. Yeah, they've done all of the things they can possibly do. Who's next? It's Euron. Euron's the next person to be faced. Let's go to Gina Z saying, hi Robert, both the Hedge Knight and the Sworn Sword are set in the Reach. I'm a little fuzzy on where in the Reach, though. Could you point out where these stories happen? Yeah, I'm very happy to. So we've got so my things playing up a little bit, so I hope I've not missed any super chats. Do tell me if I have, for whatever reason, my browser isn't working very well. Anyway, if you look at this map, the first, the Hedge Knight, the first story is it's set in Ashford Meadow, the tourney of Ashford Meadow. Now, so this is the far northeast of the Reach. So if you look on this map, it's basically in the center of this map right now. If you look at the sort of the mountains in the bottom, and just sort of above that then you can. There's it's marked on the map as Ashford. So that's where the first of the stories takes place. The second, which is the Swan Sword, that's also in the Reach. Now, that is at a castle, or sort of a fortified watchtower, called Standfast. We're not told exactly where that is, but we are told that it's in the Reach, and we're told that it's just a few miles away from Coldmoat, which is a larger castle, well, a medium-sized castle, which is held by House Weber. Now, unfortunately, we're not told exactly where that is either, but we are told that House Weber does swear fealty to House Rowan, and House Rowan are based at Golden Grove, which is right up at the sort of the top of the Reach. So if you find where Highgarden is and then follow the river direct north up towards the mountains of the Westlands, obviously the river's flowing the other way. But the last place you reach before you get to those mountains is Golden Grove. So that's the somewhere around there is where the Swan Sword takes place. Now, as for the question about Simon Schaffner saying, I've heard that George might be planning to have a Dunk and Egg story in each part of the Seven Kingdoms. So I've expected to see the 3 published stories to be in different regions. Why did 2 of them take place in the Reach? The third is in the Riverlands, incidentally. And what is it about the Reach that makes it a good setting for Dunk and Egg? Well, I don't think he's ever officially said, I might be wrong on this, but I don't think he's ever officially said that he wants to do a story based in each of the 7 kingdoms. But he does very clearly like this idea that this is a 7 kingdoms spanning story. Now, he's talked about, we've had 2 in the Reach, we've had 1 in the Riverlands, he's talked about doing 1 in Dawn. We know we're going up to the north next. The story that I was talking about a moment ago, Bears works well as being a story which is going to be set down in the Stormlands. So we're already getting quite a few of these different places. There's going to be more than 7 stories, though. He's already said that. He doesn't know how many. He sort of, when he's talked about this in the past, he's sort of like just given out random numbers. 10, 12, 14 maybe. He's planned out the first 6, but they seem to just be covering Dunk and Egg when they're young, and there's a lot more time to follow that. So I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. It's going to be 1 in each. I think that he may well try and do at least 1 in each of the 7 kingdoms, but we will see. There's a possibility, incidentally. Lady Rohan Weber, who we meet in the Swan Sword, she then later goes off and becomes Lady Lannister before mysteriously disappearing later in life. And given the fact that we know that Dunk formed a connection of sorts with her, it does certainly feel as if this is George R. R. Martin kind of just leaving a little thread there that maybe he could pick up again later. So that's another possible. That's a possible story over in the Westlands. So there's a possibility of 1 in every part of the 7 kingdoms. We simply don't know yet. And frankly, how many stories is he going to get through? I don't know. Let's go to, actually, as I've not said it yet, patrons, thank you. I always try and thank you, patrons, every single live stream, because what you do allows me to do what I do, and I hugely appreciate it. If you do want to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link down in the description. So thank you. But let's keep going with the questions. Commander Ray asking if I can talk about the Order of the Green Hand and other similar knightly orders, and how they developed and how has that impacted on the story. And Michelle Raimo also saying it's mentioned House Osgrey and House Manderley were parts of the Order of the Green Hand, and Grand Marshals of their areas of the Reach would be able to explain what those titles actually mean and what they're responsible for. Yeah, happy to. So with the Andal culture that came across, one of the things was this kind of knightly idea. And knights, it's not just you're made a knight. Down in the Reach, you can become a knight of a particular order of knights, and each of them had a slightly different feel. The Order of the Green Hand is this is basically the central and biggest and holiest of them all, which is the Green Hand being the symbol of House Gardner, so very central for the Reach, and you were only allowed into that if you were not only a great fighter, but also sort of upright and holy and good and things like that. Now, how does that impact on the story? Well, it doesn't really. It's the honest answer. It adds a little bit of extra depth to that world. It's not done much, and the Order of the Green Hand has gone now. With the Gardeners having gone, the Order of the Green Hand has now gone. The Manderleys, when we get Lord Manderley is introduced, he has a string of titles which are given to him, one of which is a Knight of the Order of the Green Hand. This is a title that they've decided just to take with them, because when they headed up, when they left, because they were based in the Reach, we'll come on to the details of this in a moment. When they were based in the Reach, then the Lord Manderley was a member of the Order of the Green Hand, and they took this title up and kept that title. When the order kind of got disbanded with the end of the Gardeners, then the Manderleys said, well, we kind of left with this title before all that happened, so we'll keep the title, thanks. So it's just one of those ones that is just, it sounds good, and they're claiming it because their heritage back in the Reach is still very important to them. As for the marshals of different areas, so the Manderleys, I think, were marshals of the Mander, which incidentally, this is, some people say this is either where the Manderleys got their name from or where the River Mander got its name from. Manderley. So that's where they were based, in a nice big castle by the River Mander. And they were marshals of that area. So basically, the way that this seemed to work in the Reach was you get the Tyrells, not the Gardeners, I should say, in charge, and then in each area, then there was a big house who were the marshals of that area. So we have to remember this was a kingdom in of itself, and so the kingdom had to rule itself, and in the same way that the Seven Kingdoms, the Iron Throne doesn't micromanage everything that happens in each part of the Seven Kingdoms. They say, okay, the Starks, you can be in charge of what happens in the North, and you can call yourself Lord's Protector of the North. That's the same feel on a small scale as what was going on in the Reach back in the day. So having these titles, the Manderleys just kept the title. They think, oh yeah, well, that's our role, and we had that before we had to leave, so we'll keep it. The Osgreys, this was more remembrance of glories past. When you read the Swan Sword, it's it's really sad. House Osgrey, there are many layers to this, and they are House Osgrey do seem to have been the authors of their own demise as much as anything else. But it is very much a house which used to be a lot more powerful than it is now. Now it's, I mean, hardly got any power at all. Landed knights is probably a very generous way of saying it. Mokshis is saying, do they have marshals' batons, decoration in peace, terror in war? We're not told anything much about them, really, sadly. This is the kind of thing that I would love to see, but they don't show it. So, Michelle Ramo was asking about that. I said I would mention this with the Manderley. So, the Manderley Peak Gardener issue, which ended with the Manderleys fleeing to the north and the Peaks ended up with their castle. Has the cause for that argument ever been stated? Well, the Manderleys and the Peaks were in the same part of the Reach, and they seem to have had a long-standing grudge with each other. Whether it was ever quite as big as the Bracken Blackwood one, we don't know, but certainly this went over generations, hundreds of years. One particular touch point we're told about was a time when the king at the time, the gardeners, he had no sons but some daughters, and one of those daughters married Lord Manderley, and another of those daughters married Lord Peak, and so they were there pushing the claims of their wives aggressively, and to the extent that the Tyrells, as stewards, had to step in, get all of the other lords of the Reach on side, and force them to back down, both of them. And the Tyrells said, okay, neither of you get to win. I'm going to pick some random cousin from over there. And so the Tyrells then put this new gardener in place, and both the Peaks and the Manderleys were put back into their place. So that's an example of a thing which happened. It seems unconnected with whatever happened that actually forced them out. But the Peaks seem to, for whatever reason, they had the ear of the gardeners, and they basically said, these Manderleys, they're getting too powerful. They've got too much money. They're there on the Mander River. They think that they're, bigger and better than all of us. And so the gardeners chuck them out. Exactly when this is not 100% clear. It's maybe 1,000 years ago. Different people give different possibilities. A few hundred years before the Aegon's invasion is the general sort of answer we get. Maybe 1,000 years in the past, maybe a bit more. But they up sticks. They're forced to go. They gather all of their belongings, their riches, their wealth, and they go hunting for a new home. And the Starks give them a new home. They say, okay, there's this land over here. It's the Wolf's Den, which is again, it's like a river. You've got a port here. There's a fort there. This is strategically important for us in the north. And this has been held by lots of different people over the years, and a lot of them have rebelled against us. If you swear fealty to us forever, direct you to us, then you can have this place here, and you can build a city here. And they built up White Harbour. There was a place, White Harbour, there before, but this turned not just into like the heart of the Northern Navy, but also the largest population center in the north, one of the 5 cities, the smallest of the 5, but the 5th largest place in all of Westeros. And that was a huge success story. And as part of this deal, then the Manderleys, they kept their southern culture. They kept their Andal culture. So when you get to the couple of chapters we have, the Davos chapters we have there in White Harbour, you'll find lots more knights. You'll find worship of the Seven. You'll find that they're, although they are very strongly loyal to the Starks, they have kept their own culture. And so when Lord Manderley gets his titles read out, a lot of them are related to where they used to be, because they still think that they are that they had that wrongfully taken from them. So the kind of implication of that is, what after all of this, and I hope that this happens, after all of this, what if they got offered to go back? I suspect that they would stay, but maybe a Manderley would be given land back in the Reach, and so the Manderleys, we can have a cadet branch back down there afterwards. Right, let's go to a question from Sir Friend. Will we ever meet Willis Tyrell? I was always interested in his character after you talked about him and Oberyn. Do you see him playing any role in the story? So Willis Tyrell is the oldest Tyrell son, and he's the one who's been left behind in Highgarden, looking after the shop. He's the heir. And we read about his past. He seems fascinating. We've not met him in person, but he seems fascinating. When he was younger and he was entered into a tourney, and Oberyn was facing him in a joust, and Oberyn Martell dismounted him, knocked him off his horse. But unfortunately, Willis got his foot stuck in the stirrup, and the horse fell on him, and it crushed his leg. And ever since then, he's been hardly able to walk properly. So we get this kind of tragic backstory. But he moves on from this, and he thinks, okay, well, I'm not going to be a great fighter anymore. I'm going to pursue other things. And he reads lots, and he does hunting. He's a great worker with hawks and hunting birds. Olenna Tyrell seems to rate him actually quite highly out of all of her family. She seems to think that he's clever and competent. And that he is part of a plan that we get to see in the story, where Sansa was going to be married to him. And basically, a lot of people are sort of there going, well, yeah, he might not be exactly what you're wanting, because I know that you're wanting some sort of gallant fighter type, but he's a good man. And this is sort of, as it turns out, a little bit foreshadowy about Tyrion, who is definitely physically not what she's looking for, but whether or not he's a good man is another debate. He's not the monster that she is told that he is, or she thinks and assumes that he must be. So what's his future? Well, he seems to be the person who stays in Highgarden. I can't see him leaving Highgarden. I don't know. Therefore, will the war come to Highgarden? And if it does, it's probably more likely to be Euron or the Lannisters who take it there than the others coming down. I mean, they might make it that far, but if they have, then we've got a whole different story than we were quite imagining, because most of Westeros will be covered in winter by then. But yeah, I think there's a fair to middling chance he might survive. Now, obviously, again, on the show, we shouldn't take what the show does as sort of exactly what happens, but their Highgarden falls to the Lannisters. Might that happen? It might. If it's the Lannisters and sorry, not to the Lannisters. Tyrion Lannister, who takes Castle Rock, and then Jaime takes Highgarden. Getting all my Lannisters confused. I do apologise. So Highgarden falls to Jaime Lannister, who then has that fantastic confrontation with Olenna Tyrell. Now, I don't think it's going to happen exactly like that, because Cersei is not Cersei in the show. She's still sitting there in King's Landing, and so all the dynamics of who they might want to attack and why is gone. What I would say is that Highgarden, although it is definitely a castle, it's not the most defendable castle in the Seven Kingdoms. It's got a lot of interesting defenses. It's got this a kind of briar rose maze between two of its curtain walls, so that if you don't know your way through the maze, then you can't progress on and attack the next level. And that's the kind of thing that could get burnt down really easily, though. So it's got some quite cool defenses, but not necessarily the strongest defense. It's not like the Eyrie being on the top of a massive mountain, or the Castle Rock being built into a massive rock. This is a castle on a hill, and not a particularly steep hill. It's a very slow sloping hill. So if someone does attack it, there's a fair chance they might get it. Let's go to Lord Medici saying 7 blessings, Robert, and to you too. I've been trekking through the Peruvian Andes, and it's been incredible. I went to Machu Picchu last week. Well, I'm incredibly jealous of that. Machu Picchu is one of those places I really want to go to, and not just there. Pardon me. A lot of the sort of the ancient civilizations, sort of just in the middle of the jungle, is absolutely fascinating. But I've got an alarm going off behind me. I hope you can't hear that. The question was, apart from the title of the Lord of the High Tower or Lord of Old Town, the head of the High Tower household has many titles we would not expect from a non-Lord Paramount. Voice of Old Town, Lord of the Port, Defender of the Citadel, and Beacon of the South. What do these titles mean? Does being Voice of Old Town or Defender of the Citadel add any jurisdiction beyond that conferred by being Lord of Old Town? What does it actually exactly mean to be Beacon of the South? It almost feels in opposition against the Warden of the South. So I would suggest that these titles, in the same kind of feel as what the Mandaleys have, the culture in the Reach is one of titles and honorifics and knightly orders and things like this. So they do accumulate these titles over time, and they hold on to them perhaps beyond the point at which their original usage is still there. Certainly for the Mandaleys, them claiming to be members of a knightly order that no longer exists is a little bit silly, but it's part of their historically what their titles are, so they've kept hold of them. And I think the same feel here for being Lord Hightower is this is ancient, thousands of years old, this role. And over time, it will have picked up various different things before, when they were effectively kings of their own area, when they were in charge of Old Town, but they were bowing to a king in Highgarden, and then later on we get the Targaryens, and there are many layers to this. So, Defender of the Citadel feels like just the kind of thing that they have taken on for themselves, or perhaps the Citadel, the Maesters having been defended once, then they say, you are defenders of the Citadel, and they went, great, oh, that's a really good title, let's add that one to the list. That's the kind of thing. I mean, so the ruler of the King of England has, actually I don't know, which way he went on this one in the end, but the ruler of England, the old Queen of England, was Defender of the Faith, and that was a title that she had, which was passed down. I think Charles swore again to be Defender of the Faith. I know he was thinking for a time to just call himself Defender of Faith rather than the Faith, but I think he went with the Faith. But this is connected back to the time of Henry VIII. Henry VIII was given this accolade, ironically, but for those who know their history, by the Catholic Church, because he'd written some really strong books and manuscripts and things defending the Catholic faith. And so the Pope gave him this title, Defender of the Faith. And then obviously he split from the Catholic Church, but thought, I like that title, I'll keep it. And that then passed down generation to generation and was still being used now. That's the kind of feel we've got here, is just if they like that. So Defender of the Citadel, Beacon of the South, is so the high tower. It's not just a tower, it's a beacon. So at the top of it, there still is a big flame. But the first iterations of the tower, it was primarily just basically a sort of a lighthouse to help guide ships. And so Beacon of the South is an interesting one because the House Hightower, this was their home. They used to live under it, and they would claim that that was their role. They were embodying being that beacon. And the interesting thing is then, what does that imply, saying they're Beacon of the South, not just Beacon of Westeros? Does that mean that there was a Beacon of the North? Question we don't really have an answer to, I think. Okay, a couple of questions from the chat. Charis Ballerina, do we know how they built the high tower? Didn't they fail to attach a tower to the base before? Were the vaults beneath it already there, or did they burrow under the base to build them? Okay, so we have a couple of levels to this, basically. You've got the island. On the island is this fused black stone building, is probably the only way of saying it, fortification. In that, this is where the Hightowers lived for a long time. There are sort of like corridors and rooms and things like that. This was sort of built in and down deep into the rock as well, I think. But that's the main layer that has been there for millennia. How that was built, we do not know. The implication is that this is technology which was not native to Westeros. This must have come from somewhere far over in Essos. As I say, it feels to me from the descriptions, though we've not been to either place as a POV in the main story, it feels like the description we have of the 5 forts. So that the same form of technology we've got going on there. Then how did they build on top of it? Well, they had 4 attempts first of building wooden structures, and they all got burned down or destroyed. And it's only when they finally decided they were going to build a stone structure that it worked. How did they do it? Bran the Builder allegedly did it. We're not told that there's some great magical means that they had flying eagles or something dropping stones from above and placing them in there. It seems like they just did it like an astonishing construction. Martin S. In the Rings of Power, Galadriel jumps into the sea outside Amman, apparently intending to swim to Middle-earth. Which beings on Arda could pull that off? Ulmo and Maiar? Yes, so I've got a few Lord of the Rings questions, which I will answer at the end of the stream. But as a short answer, her jumping off in the middle of an ocean, Galadriel is a very, very powerful elf, but the idea that she could swim for what presumably would have to be days on end in order to get back to Middle-earth. No, she could not pull that off. She didn't obviously have to, because there was happily a raft there that she managed to swim to. Ulmo, any of the Valar, absolutely. Ulmo, yes. Maiar are spiritual beings, and so yeah, it depends on what physical body they had on at the time, but they could then take on a new form. So swimming across the ocean is swimming across the ocean. It's not a thing that most people can do. TJ Guy saying never able to catch these live, so this is a nice change. Hello, Robert. Hi to you. Let's go to another question from one of my patrons. Lord Medici saying, the Citadel seems to be one of the few meritocratic institutions. Those in the conclave of Archmaesters have won their position by being the best at what they do. However, the election of the Grand Maester doesn't seem meritocratic. In the books, a character mentions that Maester Aemon should have been Grand Maester by birthright, not the kind of justification one would expect from a meritocratic institution. And we know that Pycelle was named Grand Maester while he was little more than a teenager. It's hard to imagine that he'd be the highest ranking maester at such a young age. What is the criteria based on which the Grand Maester is elected? Why is it an exception to the Citadel's meritocratic scheme? Okay, so the structure of how the Citadel hierarchy works is that you have a conclave made up of archmaesters. Each archmaester is the head of an area of learning. And you have a rod, a ring, and mask, I think it is, to show that that's what you have of a particular type of metal, each of which is associated with their area of learning. And that's the same metal that is in the chain, put into the chain. So, for example, if you study the higher mysteries, not many people do these days, but if you study the higher mysteries, magic-y stuff, then you would get a Valyrian steel chain. If you study, and I can't remember exactly what they call it, but basically maths and finance, then you get a little gold chain, a gold link to add into your chain. And that type of metal is then what is with the sort of the ceremonial instruments of the Archmaester. Now, the Archmaesters do seem to get there by some kind of merit. Well, we're not told the exact mechanism. But yes, it does seem to be some kind of meritocratic approach, although they then seem to be able to stay there. We get Archmaester Wargrave, who stays there well beyond the time when he is still the best person at his field of expertise. So it's not 100% who is the best person. There does appear to be quite a lot of politics involved. But anyway, you get the conclave, and they are the people who are really running the Citadel as a whole. They get this seneschal who is appointed for a year at a time, who is technically, he's the person in charge. But the Archmaesters, from what we can tell, they don't really want to do that job because it just takes them away from studying and stuff like that. So that's why it's only for a year. Grand Maester is a relatively recent innovation. As in most of the history of the Citadel, there was no such thing as a Grand Maester. It came with there being a ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, with the Targaryens. And Aegon wanted a Grand Maester. He wanted somebody to be advising him there. And you get the kind of the feeling that they thought, well, we've got to have a name that makes them sound even more impressive than Archmaester, and let's make them a Grand Maester. Now, who do they send? Is it their leader? No, it's not their leader. There's never any implication when we see what's going on with Pycelle. There's never any implication that he's there from afar in charge of what the Citadel's doing or their policy or anything like that. So this is not them electing a person who they think is the best of them all. This is them electing the person that they think is going to be the most effective ambassador for them in some way. Sometimes they seemed to do go for somebody who's just very old, just get them out of the way, give the Iron Throne somebody who's clearly got a whole load of age and experience so they feel good about themselves, but really it doesn't affect any of our study or whatever's going on here. That seems to be part of it. Pycelle was, as you say, he was very young when he went over there, but this does seem to have been at least partly because of his links across to the Lannisters, and Pycelle is very much a Tywin Lannister fanboy. So they probably, and don't forget, if anyone's informed about what's going on in the undercurrents of the Seven Kingdoms, it's the Maesters, because there's a Maester in every single court and castle in the land, and they read every letter that gets sent. They train everybody. They're in everybody's inner councils. They know what's going on, and so they will get to choose who is the best person to be informing them, advising them, and giving what they consider to be the best advice to the ruler. Sometimes it's just somebody who they think won't offend the king of the time, because frankly, some of the kings, they did. I think Maegor killed 4 Grand Maesters in his short reign. So it's just we're not going to send one of our brightest and best. We'll just send somebody who's more expendable. So yeah, it's not when you say when you're talking here about this being meritocratic, being Grand Maester is not, I would argue, probably seen by the conclave as being we're electing the best of us. It's we're deciding on who we can spare and who we think will do the best job there, which is not about learning and research. It's about politics. And so a lot of the time, it's about who they know. They pretend they're above politics. They give up all of their old affiliations before. But if somebody came from a particular family, that's an issue. Actually, there is there's a significant plot issue here for A Song of Ice and Fire and what's going to happen next, because we focus in, and this goes under the radar a lot, because we focus in on when we're thinking about the epilogue for Dance with the Dragons, the last chapter, the one where Kevan Lannister is killed. And we focus in on the fact that Kevan Lannister is killed, obviously. But Maester Pycelle is also, Grand Maester Pycelle is also killed. Why? Why by Varys? Why on earth would he do that? Well, we've had hints that when Pycelle fell out of favor and Tyrion was there sort of going, okay, well, I'll need a new Grand Maester, but Pycelle got brought back in, so that didn't happen. We've had hints that the conclave were going to send a Grand Maester, new Grand Maester over, who they know and most other people know, although he's given up his surname, is a Tyrell. Now, how will Cersei react to the fact that Kevan has been killed, and we know that Varys has planted a coin from the Reach there? She's going to get that clue. Then Pycelle has been killed, and the Maesters go, okay, well, we'll send a replacement who's also a Tyrell. How is Cersei going to respond? She's just going to see that as, so they killed these two. Mace Tyrell is probably going to say, I should now be hand of the king. The Maesters have sent across a Tyrell. This is their power grab from them. And then her reaction is going to be what drives the action forward after this. So keep an eye on that, because it goes slightly under the radar because of Kevin Lannister. But who the Maesters decide to send to replace Pycelle is going to be quite a significant issue. Right. Let's go to Martin S. wanting to ask a couple of geographical questions about the Reach. Is it the most populous of the Seven Kingdoms? And what percentage of the overall Seven Kingdoms population is it? What percentage of the food production is it? You also want to know if I would do a Valinor live stream at some point, now that we're doing places. Yes, I will do at some point, absolutely, when we're over doing Middle-earth. In terms of the Reach, yes, it's the most populous. As for what its population is, though, it's not 100% clear. George R. R. Martin hasn't ever said, well, this is the population of here, this is the population of here. He does occasionally for like the population of a city, but not for whole regions. So the best, and that's probably fair, because unless there was a big census in worlds, then people wouldn't know. So a POV character wouldn't know. But I think the best guesswork we've got on this, because lots of you can Google this and find lots of people have done some guesswork, but I think the best guesswork we've got on this is probably Elio Garcia, who you may well know was the person with Linda Antonsen who co-wrote The World of Ice and Fire with George R. R. Martin. So he understands a lot about George's writing style, and he understands a huge amount about the world. Now, what he's done is he's tabulated the size of the armies for each of the different regions in the Seven Kingdoms, because those things we are told about at various points, and maybe some of them are going to be a little bit off, maybe some of them, for example, the Dornish, we're told they deliberately magnify the number of their soldiers that they're supposed to have, because they've got quite a small army and they don't want to appear weak, so they pretend that they've got more people in their army than they actually have. But we've got broad ideas of the size of the armies that each of the different parts of the Seven Kingdoms can pull together. Now, what you can then do is go, if we compare this to, say, medieval Europe, what do we know as a percentage of a population would an army be that they could gather for wartime? Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm given to understand that the maximum that you might get if you're 100% going all out for war is 10% of your total population is your army size, which sounds quite low, but apparently if we bring it more recent, that's what the army sizes of Western European countries in, say, the Second World War, when this was total war, everybody was putting everything they could, because back in the day, women wouldn't be fighting, children wouldn't be fighting, old people wouldn't be fighting, and a huge amount of your population are based in support structures that you don't want to get rid of. You don't want to get rid of your blacksmiths or your millers. You don't want to be getting rid of your doctors and healers. Your farm workers, there's a huge amount, and you can't really get rid of them without risking losing your crops. So actually, the percentage of your entire population that you can send to war is a lot smaller than you might think. And the accepted rule of thumb is it's somewhere around 1% for an average. It would be higher if you're really pushing, and lower if it's more of a kind of a time of peace and you don't really need to raise big army. So in terms of like a standing army that you can raise quite quickly, which are the numbers that we seem to have, about 1% of your population seems about right. And if you then do the maths on that, you get an overall population for Westeros, Seven Kingdoms anyway, of about 40 million, which seems about right. 40 million. And the a population of the Reach of about 12 million. So it's the biggest, the most populous of the Seven Kingdoms. It's a bit under a third of the, between a quarter and a third of the overall population of the Seven Kingdoms, and able therefore to field the biggest army. That, we come back to our caveats though, is purely back of an envelope calculations though. George R. R. Martin has resisted going down to that level of granularity, and so we should be a bit hesitant in going there. But if you're wanting a sort of a vague understanding of what the sort of population of these kinds of things might be, that's what we're looking at. Let's go to a question from Moonman, saying, "Hi Robert, first time / long time. What would it take to convince you that the Tyrells are planning to deliver Renly / Joffrey / Tommen to Aegon VI?" Right. Well, that they're planning on delivering them. I don't know. So Renly's obviously dead. Joffrey's obviously dead. Tommen. I think that the Tyrells will shift to. I know you gave me a little winky emoji at the end of that, but I'm taking this seriously. I think that Tommen. I think the Tyrells will turn on the Lannisters after Cersei has got her revenge in for what she sees as the attack from them, and I don't think that their forces, the majority of their forces, will be already out with. So I don't think there'll be enough of them left in there to be delivering up Tommen. So quite a lot, I think, is the the answer to your question. But thank you. And oh yes, you wanted to clarify. We're talking about plans. I don't think that that's their plan at the moment. Let's go to a question from. Actually, we rattled through this quicker than I thought. I've got a couple more Lord of the Rings questions now. That's the last of my patrons' questions about the Reach. So let me have a quick flick through the chat. And I'll see what else we got going on. Looks like there's I can't see any more questions at the moment in the chat about the Reach, but I will happily come back. Then now is a good time to drop them in there. I'll answer these couple of questions about Lord of the Rings, and then if there are any more questions about the Reach, I will happily come back to that. Callie Summers asking about why the 3 elven rings faded in power after Sauron died, if Sauron never had a hand in their creation. Because they were created using the magical technology that Sauron had introduced. So this is one of those things where the Rings of Power changing the order of things, I think, confuses stuff a little bit. So in the books, what happens is that Sauron, disguised as Anatar, is there with Celebrimbor. 300 years, they create a whole raft of smaller rings, then they create 16 more powerful rings. Sauron nips off to create the one ring. Celebrimbor's there, left kind of twiddling his thumbs, going, "Oh, well, I was really enjoying that. I'll make some. I've learned a whole load now, and I'll make a bit more based on this, but just me. And so that's what we've got, is that it's not got Sauron's, he's not poured himself into them. This is the kind of the implications. In some way, he's kind of poured, not in the same way he did with the Ring of Power, the One Ring, I should say, but he made a personal connection which makes those corruptive in a way that Celebrimbor with the 3 elven rings much more preservative. So that's the difference there, but they are all created using the same magical technology. Tolkien doesn't like to go into details. He has a famously soft magic system, but that's the logic that's there internally, which is that they are connected to the One Ring. Because they're all using the pattern that Sauron set out. However, these ones are good and the other ones are bad, if that kind of makes sense. So they that's why they lose their power when the One Ring goes. Why did the Ents fade away so much more readily than the dwarves? This is after the Lord of the Rings, when Yavanna had asked them to be made specifically as a counter to the industry of the dwarves. I mean, we don't know that the speed at which the Ents kind of faded. From what we can tell is that the Ents, they just slowed down and just became more like the trees. We saw this happening beforehand. Treebeard mentions it. Lots of the Ents have just basically just almost stopped being Ents, stopped moving around. But this happens after the Lord of the Rings, and the dwarves carry on doing their thing, but they just mine deeper and deeper. So the way I envisage this is that the dwarf contact with the outside world reduces. They recede away from the sort of the top of Middle Earth, and they from Middle Earth's perspective, they fade in a way. They're no longer in contact with the outside world in the same way that the Ents fade. They're still there. The dwarves are still there, but they're kind of fading from the story, as it were. And then, how did Elrond not see the One Ring when Bilbo brought it back from Erebor? He loves telling stories, and surely the part about the ring would have sparked Elrond's interest. Someone who'd been very close to the ring before and had definitely seen it. So how did that? Well, firstly, yes, this is definitely true that Bilbo had picked up the One Ring, gone to Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, and then he and Gandalf headed back to the Shire, and they stopped off in Rivendell for a while. The boring answer is that when Tolkien wrote that, then he had no concept yet that was the One Ring. It was just a magic ring. The answer that I suspect you probably don't like is, as you say, you can't just say Elrond was distracted. I think distracted is probably not a strong enough word for it. What had happened from Elrond's perspective, and also from Gandalf's perspective in that time, was that they had just faced down Sauron. This thing that I forget what happens in actually the story of the Hobbit going over to reclaim Erebor for the dwarves. That was hugely important, but at the same time, the whole thing that Gandalf, the reason that Gandalf was in Middle Earth in the first place, was to help the Free Peoples against Sauron. And now, finally, after all of this time, if you remember, during the Hobbit, he nips off for a bit. And while the reason he was nipping off was to go with the White Council into Dol Guldur and face down Sauron, and Sauron manages to escape. So that is Gandalf returning back, and basically, is this Elrond being distracted? Elrond is rightly focusing in on the thing that he knows is there and is the clear and present danger to Middle Earth. Sauron's now out there, and we've pushed him out from this place. He's going to certainly he'll come back to go back to Mordor, what's his plan then? What's he going to be doing? What do we have to be doing to combat that? So it's not, he will have been in full strategy mode, I'm sure. And it's not just a matter of, oh, he was distracted, he didn't notice the one ring. Bilbo probably didn't show it around. He got his sword. If you remember when he had Sting, he didn't show that around then either. He hid it down his trousers, we're told, so nobody saw it. So I don't think there's a particular reason, particularly if he thought, and the ring's power, if you want the extra bit of work on this one, the ring's power on him will have started working. And I suspect that he will have thought, Elrond, just at the back of his mind, Elrond might want to take this from me. I'm not going to show him. So I think that's the logic behind it. House Ballerina. Will Jaime Golden Hand the Just parallel Garth the Seventh Golden Hand, fighting off the Dornish and Ironborn? Could he face Euron in Old Town, or possibly even turn on Cersei as Garth defeated the King of the Rock? So Golden Hand the Just, this is part of Jaime's arc, is he's in A Feast for Crows. He thinks through a lot of things. It's that what could he be called? He's thinking, everyone's always just going to call me Kingslayer, Oathbreaker. Could he be the Just? The Golden Hand, this is as you rightly point out, this is one of the gardeners, Garth the Seventh. So might he echo that? I don't think he's going to be that going south. I think he's now caught up with so facing Euron then and there is probably not his immediate future. He's clearly caught up in the Riverlands plot. He's caught up with Lady Stoneheart. This is going to capture him in with the idea of the Starks. Will he return again at some point down to Cersei? Well, that's entirely possible that he might do, and he might find himself a little bit jealous of Euron if Euron has struck up a partnership of whatever type with Cersei. So that's entirely possible, but I don't think he's going to be fighting him down in Old Town. I think that's not really where he's going to be at. And a last question from my patrons, Rasla asking why Eru intervened to sink Numenor at the end of the Second Age, despite rarely ever taking direct action in previous or future events. Well, this was a direct contravention of what of an order, and in a way that would be damaging to humans as well as the Undying Lands. That was not, humans were basically trying to upend the entire order of things, not just on a sort of a physical level, but a spiritual level. They were rebelling against the very idea of their mortality, the nature of their spirits and souls. So the actual crime here of the humans going over to the Undying Lands, which is what prompted Eru to intervene and just get rid of, submerge Numenor. Firstly, disobeying a direct instruction, but then secondly, attempting to overturn spiritual matters of the deepest level. And you always have to remember with Tolkien, when you get down, this isn't essential to appreciating the story as a whole, but when you get down to the real brass tacks of this, a lot of this is theology. That's the heartbeat of a lot of understanding the deeper rhythms of how his world works. Okay, let's go to have a last little look in the chat. Eric Jorgensen, thank you very much for the super sticker. I appreciate that. Andrew Kay saying the Citadel and the Faith competing for influence mentioned earlier. I view them more as two arms from the same body. One outreaches in the nobility, the other more to the small folk. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. So maesters more to the landed nobility, and then the septons more to the small folk. Yeah, that works. I'm not 100% signed up to this idea of there being a coordinated um, uh, continent-spanning plot by the Hightowers that involves the faith at the heart and the maesters at their heart. I think there's lots of connections between those different bodies, but that doesn't mean that they all always want the same. I don't think that's what you were saying, but I don't think that means they all always want exactly the same thing. Nice ballerina. Thoughts on the Arbor Gold? A character is equals a character is lying theory, and the zombie dead Leighton Melora puppet master theories. I think both of them. Actually, I will take them next time if that's okay. I like to do this if there are ones that I have heard of um, the zombie slash dead Leighton Hightower and Melora theories. I don't know enough about the evidence for them to be able to comment intelligently. So rather than me just bluster and make stuff up, I will have a little look into that, and then I will let you know my thoughts next time. Okay, so I think with that, I will start to where am I? Here I am. I will start to draw this one to a close. Tomorrow, I've been talking about it for ages, but I finally got around to doing it. A fully updated version of my Quaith video. Who is Quaith and what does she want? If you're watching this live stream a little bit earlier, you will have got a little spoiler on that. I always spoil my videos here on these live streams, but that's coming out tomorrow. And then I'm moving back to a pattern on my main channel of Monday is Lord of the Rings videos, Friday is a Song of Ice and Fire videos, on the Wednesday could be anything, random thing coming out. So that's the pattern I'm going to start moving into for the next while at least. On this channel, I had grand plans for this year, different things I was going to do for this. Hasn't quite worked out, but I'm slowly working my way back up there. Got slightly derailed by all of the TV shows happening, I have to say, but we've got a lot to look forward to coming up. I think actually I've got just another question through Martin S saying, does Manwë, this is a Lord of the Rings question, does Manwë have just air-related abilities, or does he have broader Valar abilities too? Manwë is the Lord of the Valar. So yes, he has specific air abilities. The eagles are from him. But the main thing about him is that he the Valar each have an aspect of Iluvatar's mind that they understand, that they get. Manwë understands, he doesn't understand all of it, but he has the breadth. So that's his sort of special thing, is that he's the person who gets Eru a lot more than the others do. Okay, so with that, I will be back next week. Where should we go next week? I don't think we've done Dawn, so why don't we have a look at Dawn next week? Unless you'd like me to, actually, if you're watching this back later, you can answer this down in the comments, or if you're watching live, put it in the chat quickly now. I'll have a quick look before I log off. I'm doing region by region. Would you also like me to do like houses as well? I could do one on the Hightowers. We talked a lot about the Hightowers here already, but I could do one specifically on the Hightowers or Old Town specifically, rather than just place by sort of region by region. But notwithstanding that, and I will have a look at what comments we get, I will be back next week and we will look at Dawn. So take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.